Hi everyone, my name is Giovanna Proença and today we're going to talk about CSS. Basically, we're going to learn CSS from scratch until everything that SoloLearn can give to us, okay? So if you want to get the solution to these problems and also an ebook on how to become a developer as fast as possible, click on the description below. So this will be the sections that we're going to work with: the basics, working with text, properties, positioning and layout, CSS3 basics, gradient and backgrounds, transitions and transforms, and CSS filters. And in the end, we're going to get our certification in this course, okay? So let's start from the beginning, this lesson 1. So welcome to CSS. So CSS stands for cascading styled sheets. So cascading refers to the way CSS applies one style on top of another, and style sheets control the look and feel of web documents. So basically CSS and HTML, they work together, where the HTML will be the structure and the CSS will be the style of how the HTML elements are going to be displayed. So if you want to understand a little bit more about HTML, take a look at our video that it's showing now here in this suggested list, talking about how to understand HTML and everything we can work with this. So let's start. Here we click on the continue. So what are style sheets used for? So to define the structure of web page, to store the keywords of web page, to script web page, to control the look and feel of web documents. So here it's to control the look and feel of web documents, okay? Remember the style, how this will be displayed. So why use CSS? CSS allows you to apply specific styles to specific HTML elements. The main benefits of CSS is that it allows you to separate style from content, and using just HTML, all the styles and formatting are in the same place, which becomes rather difficult to maintain as the page grows. So we can use in different ways, and we're going to see in the future. So why use CSS? It helps create unique web page, it allows for the separation of style and content, it helps make the web page browser independent. So in this case, it's to separate style and the structure, the content. Now let's go to the next part in here, if the internet helps. So inline CSS. Using inline style is one of the ways to insert a style sheet. So we can insert in different ways. This is one way. You can read this later, but basically we can write the CSS inside the HTML. So we can see in here, it's inside the P tag. Okay, so we open the P tag, and inside here we can write style and whatever we want to change. So here we're changing the color to white and the background to gray. And if we take a look in here, the paragraph, it has background gray and color white, like we're expecting to have. So this is one way. So select the attribute that organizes the inline style. So we use the word style, like I mentioned before, okay? The ID and class we're going to use for when we're referring to another file, a CSS file. So internal styles are defined within style tag element inside the head section of the HTML page. So here we can put or inside the tag, the way that it was in the previous example, or we can put the style in the head of our HTML file. So for example, we have to open and close the style tag, and in there inside we put what is the content that we want to change, in this case P for paragraph, and whatever we want to change, in this case color and background. And here we have the same idea, okay? So this is a second way of implementing CSS. So where should the style tag be declared to organize the internal CSS? So in the head, okay? Let's continue. And then we have the third way of implementing CSS, that's using in the external file. So basically you're going to create a new file for the CSS. So for example, style.css. And to work with this external CSS, we have to use this link. So basically we put a link, and rel equals to style sheet, and the href will be the name of the file of the CSS. So it's kind of doing an integration between the HTML file and the CSS file. So here we do this integration, And then in the CSS file, we can just work with this. Let's see in the try it yourself so we can understand. So basically here we have one file for HTML and another for CSS. And if we run this way, we can see here what we're expecting to have, okay? So this is a third way of implementing CSS. And I particularly prefer using external CSS because we can separate how our code works, because sometimes if we have a lot of lines in HTML, it gets a little bit confusing. So it's very good to separate things, like when we are working with Python and C language, we create functions. So here it's the same idea. So fill in the blanks to call an external style sheet called test.css. So as I said, we have to use the link tag, okay? Let's go to the next one. So CSS rules and selectors. So CSS is composed of style rules that the browser interprets and then applies to the corresponding elements in the document. A style rule has three parts, so the selector, the property, and the value. So basically the selector is the tag that we want to change. So for example, here we want to change the H1, the heading. So this will be the selector, the property, in this case it's color, and the value it's orange. So when we implement this, we're expecting to have a heading in orange. Let's try it ourselves so we can check this. So if we run, we're expecting to have a heading in orange, okay, because we're setting this way. So always try to implement the things thinking on this way. So in the rule, the selector serves a property, allows to substitute the selected attribute, select which elements to style. So selects which elements to style, okay? And basically the element is from HTML. The most common and easy to understand selectors are type selectors. The selector targets elements types on the page, for example, to target all the paragraphs on the page. So basically here it's saying what? So what if we want to change the paragraph for all of our HTML code? So in this case we just have one paragraph, but if we want to use more, for example, hello world, and if I close with a P, since here in the CSS I'm saying this is style for all the P tags, if I run this, it will be as well in red, okay? So this is one way. When we want to select one tag that already exists in HTML, we just use the name of the tag in here, okay? This is one way, so let me discard. This is one way of using HTML. So rearrange the code to create a valid CSS style. So P, open the curly brackets, the name of whatever we want, the property and the value, color blue, and then we close with the curly brackets, okay? Then we have other way of selecting content from HTML, that it's using the ID and class. So the ID, we're going to give an ID attribute for some part of the code, and this ID, it's something unique. So for example, in this case, we just want to change the color of this div. We want to change the color of this div for white and background gray. So only this paragraph, the first paragraph, will be white and gray. The other part, the other paragraph, is going to be normal, the default case, the default style, because it's outside this div in here. And like I said, we're giving an ID in here, and when we are using ID, we have to use hash. Okay, so let's recapture. Oops. So let's remember how these things work. So basically, we have the P tag, okay? So when we're using tag, we just need to put the name of the tag. And when we're using ID, we have to use the hash before, okay? So hash intro. So like we can see in here, just the first paragraph has a style, the other is the default style for HTML, because we're just changing the style for this div in here, okay? And the other thing that we can use, it's the class, and it works very similar to the ID, but in this case, the class can be used as many times on the page as needed. So the ID we can just use for one content that we want, and the class we can use a lot of times if we want, okay? So for example, here we have class only in the paragraph, So we're expecting to have this paragraph with the style of this first class, and this paragraph, this is not in intersection, again with the same style of this paragraph in here, okay, because we're setting that everything that has class first will have this style here, so the font size will be 200%. And like I was saying, so when we're working with selectors that it's for tags in HTML, we just use the name. When it's for ID, we use hash, and when it's for class, we use a dot before, okay? Always remember this way. So let's do the problem. Fill in the blanks to give a yellow background color to the element within ID intro, and back text color to the class my text. So here the background color yellow, it's for the ID intro. So basically, like I was saying, ID we always start with hash, okay? And the other we want a black text color to the class my text. So since it's a class, we have to use the dot, my text. And if we click check, it's all correct, okay? And now we have another way of doing this, so it's this descendant selectors. The selectors are used to select elements that are descendants of another element. When selecting levels, you can select as many levels deep as you want. For example, the tag in here. So let's see the problem. So the idea in here, it's what? We're going to, if we want to change something specific, we can use this descendant selector. So in this case, we're saying in the hash intro, so inside the div that has an ID intro, there is a class that has name .first. So inside this ID, we're going to check this class first. And inside this class first, we have a tag that it's EM. So we're going to change whatever is inside this EM, that is inside this class first, that is inside this ID intro. So this is why we're talking about descendant selectors. So if we think about, we are expecting to have this word paragraph in pink and background color gray. And if we take a look in here, this is what is happening, okay? This way here, it's a little bit more confusing, but with time you get more familiar on how to manipulate this, okay? Don't worry. Right now, I know it's a lot of things, but you're going to be able to do all of this once you understand how to use it. So drag and drop from the options below to create a style rule for all paragraph belonging to the element with ID text. So since it's an ID text, we're going to use hash, and we want to get all paragraphs belonging to this element. So since we want to get all paragraphs, we're going to use just P, because P is a tag from HTML, so we don't need to use hash before our dot, okay? Let's go to the next one. So CSS comments. So basically in CSS comments, we can comment things, like we can comment in HTML, Python, C language, any line of code, and any language of code of programming, we can use comments. And basically we just use comments using a /*, and when we want to close this comment, we put at the end a star and /. Okay, this is just this. And this comment is not going to show up for us, it's just a comment, so other people that might want to read your code can understand what are you doing in there, okay? So let's continue. So turn the text into a comment in CSS, so /*, and to close */. And we can comment like multiple lines of code. You don't need to comment just one line, only using this, okay? Let's continue. Let's wait a second. So now style, cascade, and inheritance. So the final appearance of a web page is a result of different style rules. The three main sources of style information that form a cascade are: the style should be created by the author of the page, the browser's default style, and the style specified by the user. So let's see here. Which three different sources are responsible for the style you see on the web page? So this is what we already I already said, okay? So the style should be created by the author of the page, the user customized style selectors, if any, and the default style of the browser itself, okay? And inheritance. So inheritance refers to the way properties flow through the page. a child element will usually take on the characteristics of the parent elements unless otherwise defined. So in here, for example, we're saying body and color green and font family Arial. So what is body? We have here this body tag, and what we have inside the body tag? So inside the body tag we have a paragraph. So everything that is inside this body tag is going to have a color green and the font family Arial. I don't know how to say this. So basically everything that is inside the body is going to have this style unless we say to change this style, but the default case will always get this style. So like I mentioned, since we have a paragraph inside the body, so the paragraph will have the style for the body, that is color green and font family Arial. Okay, so what color does the paragraph have? So we're saying body with color green and my div with color red. So inside the body where we think that we should be green, but since the paragraph is inside my div, the class my div, and the class my div is saying color red, so since it's inside this div, the color of this paragraph will be red. Okay, so we're expecting to be red by the inheritance. And I think now we're going to do the quiz. Yes, the quiz for this module. So from the 3 types of styling, which one is the most useful in terms of web optimization? So in web optimization, it's always good to use external, okay? Because you can separate whatever you want to think about the code. And if you have a long HTML file, you can separate in CSS and things get more clear. So what is the style when creating an internal CSS? So an internal CSS means when we're working inside the HTML, we're adding CSS in the HTML, not creating a new file for CSS. So for this style, it's a tag, okay, that we put on the head, remember. So the style definition rule consists of selector, property, and value. So the selectors for our example was H1, the property was color, and the value was orange, okay? Let's check, correct. And we have this last part, so fill in the blanks to apply white text color to the paragraph. So if we want to apply white text color, we can use the property that it has name color. And don't forget to use the colon in here, okay, to separate the property from the value. And if we check, all correct. Okay, so we're done with the first module. Now let's do the next one. So here we have the font family property, okay, so the font family property specifies the font for an element, and we can give like a font family that already exists in the library of CSS, or we can add from other parts, okay, so we have here some examples, and we can use this class serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. And if you take a look, they have all different style for this font family for the text, okay? So drag and drop from the options below to make the font of the paragraph Arial. So we want to change the font of the paragraph. So here the name of our the thing that we want to change, so the selector, it's the P, right? The P tag. And here we want to change the font family, so we're going to use font family, and we want to use Arial. So if we check, all correct. The font family property. So here the font family property should hold several font names as a fallback system. So when specifying a web font in CSS style, add more than one font name in order to avoid unexpected behaviors. If the client computer for some reason doesn't have that one you choose, you can put another one. So it's like if we don't have this font family Arial, so the second option is this Helvetica New. So if we don't have this, it will be this one. If we don't have this, we will use the option 4. So this is basically the idea, okay? So why is the name of the properties? Why is the name of one of the fonts put in quotes? So this is here. It's one thing that it's in the notes. So basically remember to use quotation mark if the font name consists of more than one word. And we can see in here, so since it's separated by the space, we're going to use quotation mark. Here it's just one single word, and here we use the dash, so we don't need to use quotation mark. So if consists of 2 or more words, okay? Let's go to the next one. So here we have a lot of lessons to do. Let's finish, and then I have a little break. So the font size property sets the size of a font. So we can use numbers, okay? So for example, I want to have 17 pixels, like we use on Word, for example, when we're writing a document on Google Drive or on Word. So we can set a number, or we can use this XX small, small, medium, large, and larger, okay? And we can use this class in here. So we create a class and we set the font size to small. So we have these cases in here. So for example, this is the small, medium, large, and the larger one, okay? You can use some things that are already created. So rearrange the code to create a style rule. So P, okay? We want to change the style for the paragraph, open the curly brackets, put the name of the property and the value, and then close with the curly brackets. Then the font size property. So like I was mentioning, we can use as well numbers, like we use on documents that we're typing in Word or Google Docs or any other thing that you might use. So we can use numbers, and we have some specific units. So we can use pixels or EMS to manipulate font size, okay? And here he gives us an idea of how it works, basically. So set the font size of the paragraph to 15 pixels. So font size, and here we can just put the number and the unit, okay? Don't forget to use the unit in here. Let's go to the next one. So font style. Now font style, we're going to work with italic, bold, or other types that we might have. So we can use font style and the name that we want to change. In this case, it's italic, but we have other ones to use. So make the text italic, we can just write the name italic and the compiler will understand. So this is something that already exists in the library of CSS. The font style property. So like I was mentioning, we have italic, normal, and oblique. But oblique is very similar to italic, but less supported. So few browsers might not have this one. Like I was mentioning, we can just use the names. And in HTML, if we think about, we already have a tag that reproduces the same result as the italic. So you can opt you can choose to use the I tag or the font style in CSS, okay? What value is not supported with the font style property? So is length, we didn't mention, so this is not supported. Now font weight. The font weight controls the boldness or thickness of the text. The values can be set as normal, bold, bolder, or lighter. So here it's to make things bold or not, okay, if we want to change the style as well. So which CSS properties is used for bolding the text is the font weight, okay? The font weight property. You can also define the font weight using a number from 100 to 900, okay? You can use one of them. So basically the convention here is that 400 is the same as normal and 700 is the same as bold, okay? So we can use here numbers and we're going to get a bold font in here as well. So which numerical values are used to font weight properties? So 100 to 900, okay? So font variant, let's take a look at this one. The CSS font variant property allows you to convert your font to all small caps. The values can be set as normal, small cap, or inherent. So like in here we have normal, okay, so we have normal, variant normal, and variant small caps. Let's see the difference. So if we want to use the small caps, it leaves this way, a different way that it's not so nice to see, but it depending on the style you want to use, you can use this one, okay? Just one more property that you can use. So make the text of the paragraph small caps. So font variant is small caps, this is how we can use the small caps. Now let's change the color. We already saw how to use the property of color, but now we're going to learn how to implement this. So basically we can use the name of the color, okay, like red, green, blue. So it's going to give us a default color for this green. In this case, this will be the green. And also when we don't give a color for our code, it's going to always give to us a black color, okay? So here, drag and drop the options below to make the text of the colored class green. So we know that the class that we're going to change will be the has name colored. So since it's a class, that's why we have a dot here. So p dot colored, and we want to change the color to green. So the property is color and the value is green. Okay. And more than just using names like black, white, green, purple, red, we can use hexadecimal values and RGB. So for hexadecimal form is a £, so we use hash and follow at most 6 hex values. So we can use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and A until F. So hexadecimal color, let me show you. So these are the hexadecimal color, okay, we can use. So for example, if I want to use this green, so the hexadecimal color is 4FFF33, and this will give us this color that we want. If we want to get another color, so we can change using this hexadecimal thing here. And as well, we can use the RGB, that it's red, green, and blue. That this is something that I prefer to use hexadecimal because it's nicer to see, but we can use as well in here. For example, the hexadecimal, it's this, and the RGB, the corresponding value, it's 11, 106, and 103. So you can use both hexadecimal or RGB, whatever you prefer, okay? So for example, here we're seeing 000FF and this 25500, and we're going to get 2 different colors, okay? So always check these HTML color codes, and it's very nice to pick one color that you might use, okay? So which of the following options are accepted by the color properties? So color names and hexadecimal we can use, okay? Aligning text horizontally. So the text align property specifies the horizontal alignment of the text in an element. By default, text on your website is aligned to the left. However, at times you may require different alignment. So basically the default, like the color, the default for the color is always black. The default for text align is always left, but we can change to left, right, center, or justify. It's the same as you think about the Word. In the Word document, we can change the text alignment for our texts. So here we have text aligned to the left, to the right, and to the center, okay? Only using this text align and the name. So which of the values below is not applicable for the text align property? So we have left, center, and right. We don't have even, okay? So let's go to the next one. We have a lot of things to do in this module. It's okay. Now we're going to work with a vertical align property. So here it's the same idea as the horizontal align, but in this case we can use top, middle, or bottom, okay? And the most cases are going to give us the top. So if we want to change, we have to set this in here. So for example, we can use vertical dash align, and then we put the name of the property we want to use. We can put top, middle, or bottom. Like we can see top, middle, or bottom. This is the vertical align. So fill in the blanks to set the vertical alignment of all elements having class test to the bottom. So we want to put all elements of the class test. So since it's a class, we have to use dot test. And here we want to have a vertical alignment. So vertical align, this is the name of the property. And the value, we want to set the vertical line having to the bottom. So we can use here bottom, the name, the word bottom. And we're going to get the right property. The vertical align property also takes the following values: baseline, sub, super, percent, and pixel or another unit like pt or centimeters. So the example below shows the difference between them. So if we use baseline, it's going to show us this way. Let's see. This shows us this way. The sub will give us this way, like a little bit more for the bottom, a little bit. The super will give us this part a little bit more for the top, and the pixel we can set a number. So for example, here we're using -10. So we always have to think in the axis. So let me draw in here. You always have to think about the axis that we have. So always remember this, the X and the Y. So if we say minus, we want to go to -10. So we want to go down. That's why in here we're going -10 down. Okay? Let me get out of this drawing. So let's go. Continue. So negative values can be used with the align property, and that's true. That's what I just mentioned. The vertical align property does not act the same way for all elements. For example, some additional CSS style is needed for div elements. So sometimes we cannot use vertical alignment depending if the height is not a good height for this. So for example, in a div, we can set the alignment in the middle, but like the text, sometimes the paragraph is all in one line, so it's not necessary to use the vertical alignment for paragraph, okay? Because paragraph is just, we have a specific height for this. But div, like I mentioned before, we can specify a height, and in this height we can set the vertical alignment. So in here the text is aligned to the middle. And we can use this by using the div, okay? That's how we can change. So does the vertical align property act the same way for all elements? No, depends if we have height to use this vertical alignment. Let's go to the next one. So text decoration. So here the property specifies how the text will be decorated. So none, so this will be a normal text, inherits this property from its parent element. Overline draws a line, horizontal line above the text. Underline draws a horizontal line below the text, and line through draws a horizontal line through the text. So like we can see in here, there are these ones. So this is the normal one, this is the inherits, that it's going to give the style from another parent. This is the overline, so the line, there is a horizontal line above the text, the underline is below the text, and this is the line through that it's in the middle of the text, okay? You can use if you want, so it's just one style. What value of the text decoration property substitute the HTML S tag? So like he mentioned here, the S tag, we can substitute the line through using this S tag here, okay? So line through. The text decoration properties, so another value of text decoration is blinking, so we can make the code blink if we want. Let me show here on the code. So I tried to do this here, so I created here an HTML part using this text decorator blink, but it's not showing, and here we have this value is valid but is deprecated and most browsers ignore it. But basically the idea of this blink is to do what is happening here with this arrow, so the text blinks, okay? This is the idea. Now let's continue. So the text decorator property, fill in the blanks to make the text underline. So we have our hash my style, so we have to open the curly brackets. And if we want to use the text decoration property, we have to write text decoration and then close with the curly brackets, okay? Now let's go to the next one. So indenting the text. So the text indented property specifies how much horizontal space should be left before the beginning of the first line of the text. So here's giving the indentation for a text, okay? Property values are length, like pixels, pt, centimeters, em, etc., percent, or inherent, so you can use one of them. So this text indented, if we click in here, we're saying that we want to have an indentation of 60%, and here we have this indentation of 60%. And like it's mentioned, is always in the first line of the text, okay? That's why we just have this indentation in here and we don't have in the other lines. So the position of which block is specified by the text indented property. The whole text block except the first line of the text block, so the first line of the text block, okay, like I mentioned. Let's go to the text shadow. So this is another property that adds shadow to the text. It takes 4 values. The first value defines the distance of the shadow in X in the horizontal, and the other defines in the vertical direction. The third value defines the blur of the shadow, and the fourth value sets the color. So here we're setting the horizontal direction, the vertical direction, how much we want to blur this, and the color. So if we see, this is the result. It's saying gray, but it should be, yeah, so we can see gray in here. Do you see? The gray is the color of the shadow, not the title, okay? Not the heading. What is the format of the value for the text shadow property? So upper left position, so no, it's horizontal, like I said, vertical, blur, and color, okay? And text shadow with blur effect. So when working with shadow, you can use any CSS supported color format. The X and Y are used in any unit that you want. Negative values are also supported. And here is just giving another example of this blur effect, okay? So the example below creates a blue drop shadow 2 pixels higher than the main text, 1 pixel to the left of it with a 0.5 em blur. So this will be the same ideas, but in this case he put the color in the beginning, then in the horizontal, vertical, and then, so 2 pixels higher, yes. So horizontal, vertical, and the blur effect, and that's what we can see in here, okay? So create a text shadow with horizontal and vertical distance of 5 pixels, blur radius of 2 pixels. So if we want to use the text shadow, 5 pixels for horizontal, and for vertical again 5 pixels, and the blur it's radius 2 pixels. Okay, and if we check, it's all correct. Now text to transform. So this property specifies how to capitalize an element's text. For example, it can be used to make text appear with each word capitalized. So if we use this capitalize class, we don't need to write it down using the caps lock, for example. If we use this, it's going to give all the first letters uppercase, okay? We don't need to worry about this. So drag and drop from the options below to make each word capitalized in the paragraph. So the paragraph here, the p tag dot cap first, so the cap first is the class that we're gonna work, and the property here is text transform, and the name of the value it's capitalize. Okay, so if we check, it's all correct. We also using text transform property, you can make text appear in all uppercase or all lowercase. So this is the same idea, but now instead of just the first letter will be everything or uppercase or lowercase. Okay, just using this. So we can use text transform to change whatever we write it down in there. The default case is none, so it's what we're writing in here, but since we're using text transform, it's going to change. So which option is not supported by the text transformation property? The small caps is not for this text transform property, okay? It's the other property that we already saw. Letter spacing. So in this case, the property specifies the space between characters in a text. So the space can be normal, we can give a number, or inherit from another property. So we use letter spacing with normal or the number and the unit. So this is the letter spacing in the horizontal, okay? So here, if we want to change the letter spacing to a paragraph, we have to use the P tag, and then letter spacing, that is the name of the property, and the number with the unit, okay? Using negative values. So for defining an extra space between characters, negative values are also permit. So here the negative will remove the space, so they are going to have less space between them, and positive values are going to increase the space between the letters, okay? So fill in the blanks, the letter spacing -1 centimeter, and we can use here this way, okay? Now word spacing. Word spacing is basically the same idea, but now instead of changing the space between the characters, will be the space between the words, and you can use the same values that we have so far. So using normal or some number with some unit in here, and now we can see is the difference is the space between the words, not the characters. So here we want a word spacing 15%, so we can just use the word spacing and 15 here. Measurement units, so we can use any of these ones, okay? And it all depends. So 20 pixels, we give this, and if we use negative value, we'll decrease the space between the words, okay? It's the same way how it works in letters spacing. So which measurements units cannot be used with the word spacing? So we don't use feet or yards if you take a look at the previous page, okay? And now let's go to the last session of this unit before the quiz. So we have the white space property, and specify how white space inside an element is handled. The space can be normal, inherit, or no wrap. The no wrap value makes the text continue on the same line until a BR tag. So the BR tag kinds of break the line, okay? This is how BR tag works. And also collapses all sequence of white space into a single white space. So here we have a huge white space, but if we use no wrap, here we don't see this white space like we have here when we write the text. Okay, so you can handle with white space like the same way you can handle with other properties in here. So which of the following dictates the purpose of the no wrap? It collapses all sequence of white space into a single. It puts the whole text in one line. Okay, these are the two main ideas. The white space values also supports other values. So text will only wrap one line breaks and is white space. Pre-line, text will wrap where there is a break in code, but extra white space is still ignored. And pre-wrap, text will wrap when necessary and on-line breaks. So it's basically handling with this. Okay, this is the difference. You can take a look in this later. So what is the difference between the pre and pre-line options? So pre accepts line breaks and white space, while pre-lines ignores white space. Okay, this is what I just read. You can just take a look at that page. And now let's do our module quiz in here. So what is the correct CSS syntax for making all P elements bold? So if we want to change all the P elements, we need to use the P curly brackets or inside the P style. But in this case, if you want to make everything bold, we have to work with the font weight. Okay, so we can use P font weight bold, P style text size bold, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to use this font weight. This is the correct one, okay? The font weight is just for bold. The text style is for italic, oblique, and normal. So fill in the blanks to make the paragraph red and bold. So we want to change the color to red, and the paragraph we want to make this bold. So like I mentioned, it's the font weight that we can handle with boldness. And the last one, fill in the blanks to make the text of all H1 elements bold, red, and 14 pixels. So we want to change all H1. So here we can just use H1 because this is a tag from HTML. The font size is 14. The font weight, this is the property for bold, okay, and the color red. So we finished one more module. Let's do the next one. The CSS box model. All HTML elements can be considered as boxes. The CSS box model represents the design and layout of the site. It consists of margin, border, paddings, and the actual content. The properties works in the same order: top, right, bottom, and left. So here we have the content. For example, if we have a div with a paragraph, we have a padding, we have a border, and we have a margin, all in all directions, okay? So let's see in what order to do the property works in the box. So left, top, right, bottom. So as we saw in here, it's top, right, bottom, and left. So top, right, bottom, and left. Now let's go to the next one. Understanding the box model. Every element of the web page is a box. The CSS uses the box model to determine how big the boxes are and how to place them. So according to the box model, every element on the web page is a box. Oops, let me take out the caps lock. Total width of an element. When working with boxes, it is important to understand how the total width of an element is calculated. For example, the total width of the box with paddings will be the sum of width plus padding left and padding right. So here, if we have a width 200 pixels and we have a padding left 10 pixels and padding right 10 pixels, the total width will be 220 pixels. So the sum of all of this horizontal part. And here's another box with margin, borders, and other things. So the total sum will be the sum of everything we have in here. So if we have a margin, border, padding, the width, padding, border, and margin, so this will be the total width, okay? So the background color of a content also covers, let's take a look in here, it's probably in here. So properties with blah, 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 and height, you set the width and height of the content. When setting a background color to a box, it covers the content area as well as the paddings. So the content and the padding. So let's check, it's the padding. The total height of an element is the same idea as the width. So you have to sum everything, not only the height, but the padding, the border, and the margin as well, okay? So enter the total width of an element with, let me draw. I think this way it might be easier to understand. So here it's our content. So width, I'm not so good with drawing, so this is a W. The width is 150 pixels. We have left and right padding. Left and right padding of 5 pixels in every part. We have a border, let me change the color. So we have a border of 2 pixels, and we have margin of, let me change the color again, of 5 each. Okay, so the total width will be the sum of all of this. So 5 plus 2, 7, plus 5, 12, plus 150 will be 162, 167, 169, and 100, oh my god, 174. Let me get out of this. 174 pixels, and that's the correct height, width of everything. Now let's work with borders only. So the CSS border properties allows you to customize the border of HTML elements. In order to add a border to the element, you need to specify the size, style, and color of the border. So for example, in here, we can say this paragraph is an example of a solid border, and here we have border of 5 pixels, it's solid and it's green. So here we can see this solid green border. So the 3 properties describing the border are color, size, and style. The position is another property that we can use. Border width. The properties for the border can be set separately. The border width property specifies the width of the border, so we can work with the width of the border. Okay, so here the width will be 5 and here it's 10, so we can see that here it's a little bit greater than the other. And we can also set the color, so we can use the name of the color, the hexadecimal, or the RGB colors in here, okay? RGB values. So here we want to fill in the blanks to set the border style. So since we want to work with border style, the property will be border style as well, okay? The border style property, the default value of border style is none, but there are other border style properties like the dotted, the dashed, and the double. Like we can see here the difference. So the dotted, dashed, double, grooved, and ridged. We have a lot of here that we can see, and the hidden in there that we cannot see the border basically. So drag and drop from the options below to set border style of the element to solid and make it 5 pixels. So border style solid, border width 5 pixels, and border color FF6600. Okay? Width and height. Now we're going to work a little bit with this. So to style a div element to have a total width and height of 100 pixels, we can use the width and the height the way that we want. We can use the border, width, and height, and the width will give us the width of this div, the height will give the height of this div, and so on and so forth. So fill in the blanks to set the height and div of the div to 50 pixels and the width to 100. So since we have no border, so we want the width to be 100 pixels and the height to be 50 pixels. Okay? Width and height measurement. So they can be also assigned using percent, so you can use numbers with units or percent. In the example below, the width of an element is assigned in percentage, the height in pixels. So if we want to use 100% width, we're going to use all the width that we have in this page, for example. And the height, we can use a number with a unit. So width and height are usually expressed in pixel and percents. Okay? And the minimum and maximum sizes to set the minimum and maximum width and height of an element. You can use the following properties: min width, min height, max width, max height. So you can set what will be the max height of some element on your HTML, or min, or width, or you can choose whatever you prefer. Okay? So set the minimum allowable width to a div of the div to 200 pixels. So we want the minimum, we use min width and 300 pixels. Okay, let's see here the next one. So background color, we can also change the background color of some things like we already saw in the beginning of this SoloLearn. So the background color property is used to specify the background color of an element. So if we want to put like this hexadecimal value, it's going to show here. So basically the background color, we can use hexadecimal, the name of the color, or RGB as well. So what property is used to describe the background color? It's background dash color. Okay? So like I said, the values can be the color name, the hexadecimal values, and RGB. And you can use in any part of your code as you want. So like the body will be this one, but the H1 we wanted to use another color, and the paragraph another color. So this gray is for the body, this blue here is just for the heading, and the gray is just for the paragraph, like we set in the CSS. Okay? So fill in the blanks to make the background color of the element with ID my style black using hexadecimal color definition. So the element is ID, so remember ID it's hash and the name, so my style. And here we want to change the background color to using the hexadecimal color definition. So hexadecimal, we always use hash in the beginning as well. Is this 0000 will give us a black color, okay? Let's go to the next one. So we have background color, but we can also use background image to set one or several background images in an element. For example, if we want to use a background image, we have to use this URL. So the URL, we can give the path of where our image is. So if it's in a file, we can use this css_logo.png, or if we want to get an image from Google Image, we can copy the link of this image and paste in here and we can use it. So there are several ways of working with background image. So the way that we use the image path is always URL, parentheses, and inside the quotation mark where this image is, okay? And the background color can be set not only for the whole page, but for individual element as well. So for example, if we want a background image just for the paragraph, we can do the same, like we can see in here. We don't need to use only in a body, but we can use in a div, in a p tag, anything we want. So fill in the blanks if we want to put in a body, so curly brackets, URL to give the path, and close the curly brackets, okay? Now let's go to the next one. So here, background repeat. So we can set if we want the repetition of the image or not. So a background image can be repeated along the horizontal axis, the vertical axis. Both axes are not repeated at all. So to repeat, the repeat X will repeat the background only horizontally. Okay, so we can put background repeat X, and it's going to repeat in the X axis. And we can use vertically, so repeat Y, and it's going to repeat in the Y axis. And we can use no repeat or repeat in both directions. So fill in the blanks to make the background image repeat along the vertical axis. So the vertical axis, it's the Y axis, okay? So the background image, we can give the URL for the path where the image is, and the background repeat property. And in here, we want to repeat in the vertical, so it's the Y axis, so repeat Y. Setting the value to inherit. When you set the background repeat property to inherit, it will take the same specified value as the property for the element's parent. For example, we set the body background repeat only horizontally. If we set some paragraph background repeat values to be inherited, they will take the same property value as the body element. So the inheritance, we're going to get what we already set to another parent for this. So for example, in the body we said that the repetition is in the X, so the paragraph that is inside the body will get the repeat X, because here we're using the inherit. And we can see in here, okay, so the body, and here in the paragraph it's also in the X. So the other property that we can use in here, it's repeat, no repeat, repeat X, repeat Y, and inherit, okay? And this is it. Let's see the next one. So we have now background attachment. So let's see what we have so far. The background attachment property sets whether a background image is fixed or scrolls with the rest of the page. So if we say it's fixed, when we scroll down, the image will be fixed in here. And if we use scroll, this is going to scroll with the image. So if we scroll down this page, the image is going to scroll together, okay? So let's see what we get so far. So when setting a background image, what property is obligatory? So the background image, okay, not the attachment and not either the repetition, because the image we need to say what is the URL for the image. You can also set the background attachment to inherit or scroll. So the inherit is going to get the property of a parent, and the scroll, the image will scroll with the rest of the content. So if we scroll down, we can see the image at the same place, okay? So the background attachment properties accept the following values: inherit, fixed, and scroll. And let's go to the next lesson. So styling the lists. Here we can work with unordered list, that is the tag UL from HTML, and ordered list that has OL as tag. So the unordered list is going to give us a random list, so we don't have to order this. And then An unordered list is going to give us 1, 2, 3 or A, B, C. So we're giving like an order for this list basically. So one of the ways is to use the list style type property, which can be set to circle, square, decimal, disk, lower alpha. So for ordered list, we can use either numbers or lower alpha. And for unordered list, we can use circle, square, or dots, like the way that normally appear. So the list style type applies to the bullets or number rings of the list, the fonts of the list to background. So the bullets are number rings, okay? Because we can change to square, circle, or alpha, or numbers, whatever we prefer. List image and position. So the list style image specify an image to be used as the list item maker, and the list style position specifies the position of the marker box, inside or outside. So in this case, we're saying that we want the position to be inside, so we're going to see the image here inside the list, okay, instead of the list. So which keywords is used to specify the image location address for the list in blah blah blah. So we can use inside, let me see, URL, to give the location of the image, okay, like the background image. The list style property is a shorthand property for setting list style type and list style image, list style position. It is used to set all the list properties in one declaration. So instead of saying list style type square, list style position outside, and list style image none, we can say everything in one line. So just using list style, we put the type, the position, and the image, okay? So it's like, instead of using 3 lines of code, we can use only one. So this UL, so square, it's for the type, outside is the position, and image is the none value, okay? Styling the tables. So here's the same idea. We can have borders like we have outside tables, and the border collapse property specifies whether the table borders are collapsed into a single border or separated as default. If the borders are separated, the border spacing properties can be used to change the spacing. So we can have a border collapse, and if we have border separated, we can use border spacing. So if we have border collapse separated, we can use the border spacing to say what is the spacing between everything. So here we have 20 pixels. So here it's saying 20 pixels in the horizontal and 4 pixels in the vertical alignment. The properties regarding tables are border collapse and border spacing. The caption side property specifies the position of a table caption. The values can be set as top or bottom. So let's see the example. So if we have here top, we're saying that the things are going to be in the top, and this is basically the default case, but it can also be in the bottom, okay, for the properties. So here it's caption side, and we want to put the caption side of the table at the bottom. Is one more style that we can use, okay? The empty cells properties specifies whether or not to display borders and background on empty cells in the table. So if we put the empty cells can have only 2 values, or show or hide. And like it said, if we put show, we want to show the empty border, but here we put hide, so we're hiding this cell in here, okay? So fill in the blanks to hide the empty cells of the table. So table, open curly brackets, and since we want to hide, here we're going to put hide as well, okay? The table layout property specifies how the width of table columns is calculated. The possible values are auto and fixed. The table layout is set to auto by default. Later you can read this better, but basically we can see here if we put auto, it's going to put like the default, and if we put fixed, we have to we're going to see this difference in here. So it's not going to change the layout of the table, okay? And sometimes we can overwrite in the other cell, and sometimes we don't want this. So what is the default value of the table layout? It's auto, okay? The default case in here. Now let's see the next one. So styling the links. So here it's, for example, if there is a link and we want to click to visit it. For example, in here we have a link. So if we use the A tag in HTML, for example, and a link defines the style for normal unvisited links, a visit defines the style for visited links, a active, a link become active once you click on it, and a hover, a link is hovered when the mouse is over it. So we can use this to, for example, if we hover in the link, we want to change the color to red, and here when we hover, change the color to red. Here, sorry, when we hover, we see the color in red, and when let me see another one, and when we click, it's going to turn to purple, basically. So we can set what will be the color depending how we manipulate the link. So for example, let me put here CS50. Just 1 second while this is opening. If we have here CS50, this is a really good course. I recommend if you want to learn a little bit more about programming. So for example, this is one link, okay? If I hover this link, it's because my computer is showing. So this is the link when it appears, and when I hover, do you see that appears this underline? So you can set the style for this, and when I click, it goes there, but when I come back, it doesn't change the color. So you can style how this is supposed to be depending on what you prefer. So what type are the link visited, active, and hover selectors? So they are of type pseudo, because you can use different classes in there. It's something that they didn't mention, but it's like, just let's move on with this. So by default, text links are underlined by the browser. One of the most common uses of CSS with links is to remove the underline. In the example below, the text decorator property is used to remove the underline. So this is the same idea as we saw in CS50. If we don't want to show the underline, we can use the text decoration and you put none, okay? So, and also we can use border. So here we have border nums, remove border from image with links. So what value is used to remove borders of images with links? We put none in here. All right. Let's continue. We're almost finishing this module. Let's go to the last lesson. So setting the mouse cursor style. So here it's very interesting, this part, because now we're working with the user experience basically. So we have to think on how the user is going to understand what they can do in this site. So for example, here, take a look at my cursor. It's showing the regular cursor that we see. But if I hover my mouse in a button, it changes the cursor to a pointer. So we know that we can click in this button and something will happen. The same happens in here. If I hover in here, I know that I can click. So we can use this cursor style to kind of guide the user in the experience in the web page. So it's very interesting. So we can change the cursor to this, do you need help? So it appears this question mark right next to the cursor and things like that, okay? So which properties allows to change the style of mouse cursor? So it's the cursor, okay? And we have a lot of properties. So the default will be this one that's showing here. This is the default, and we have all of them. But the main used are the pointer, okay? And I think the others are not so used, and the text as well, when we want to know when we can write in some part of the code. The others you can search around, it's not necessary to remember, but the text and pointer are very important. So what value of the cursor property display a plus icon? So we can check in here what displays a plus icon. So is this crosshair here that displays this plus icon. So we can write crosshair. And now the default value. So if the cursor value is set to false, users may not see the link. So this is what I was explaining about user experience, okay, this part here. So drag and drop from the options below to make the cursor appear as a pointer on paragraphs. So P, we can put cursor and the style will be pointer. So we know that we can click on this paragraph basically, okay? So we finished this new module and let's do the quiz and see what we get. So let's do the quiz. Add the padding value so that it has 10 pixels to the bottom, 15 pixels to the, 10 pixels to the left, 15 to the bottom, 5 to the right, and 10 to the left. So like we saw previously, we always have to think on top, right, bottom, left. So top is 10, okay, sorry, I already wrote 10. Then right, so what is the value of right? Is 5, bottom, and that it's 15, and then the left, that is 10, okay? How do you make a list not display bullet points? So we can use the list style type and say none, okay? This is the property and the value to display no bullet points. Fill in the blanks, so here we have body, background image with this URL for the path of the image. Here we have background and repeat X. So the value is repeat X, so the property is background repeat. A hover, here we have text something and the value is underlined. So we know that text decoration that we can use with underline. Color it's black here, but in the hexadecimal. And crosshair, it's for cursor, okay? When we want a cursor with a plus sign. And then make the cursor appear as a crosshair on all links on the web page. So links, they are structured using a tag in HTML. And if we want the cursor to appear as a crosshair. Okay, so we finish one more quiz in here. Let's go to the next one. So now we're going to work with the display property, and this is a very value property that you're going to use basically in all your CSS code. Okay, so every element on a web page is a rectangular box. The display property determines how the rectangular box behaves. A block element is an element that takes up the fullest width available with line breaks before and after. The style rules in the following example display the inline span elements as a block level elements. So if we use display block, this is how they are going to look like. So they are going to be they're going to take the fullest width available with line breaks before and after, and this is how we can see right now. Okay, so what value of the display property makes the inline element act as a blocking level element? So here we're going to use the block. Okay, now we have the display inline, so the inline element only takes up as much width as necessary and does not force line breaks. So if we want to put like the same example below before, instead of having one in each line, here we have all in the same line. This is how the inline works. Okay, so what value of the display property makes the block level element act as an inline element? So display inline, the inline is the value. And we have here the display none. So the none will hide an element. So for example, if you don't want to show up something, you can, instead of removing, you can display none and it's not going to show in here. So we have this text will not display, blah, blah, blah. So here we don't have this text because we're displaying none for the H1, okay? So here, if make the element disappear. So this is the ID, and display to disappear, we use none, okay? Let's go to the next one. This is a shorter lesson, but a very important one that you're going to use a lot. The visibility property. So the visibility property specifies whether an element is visible or hidden. The most common values are visible and hidden. Hiding an element can be done by setting the display property to none or the visibility property to hidden. However, notice that these two methods produce different results. The visibility or hidden hides an element, but it will still take up the same space as before. The element will be hidden, but it will still affect the layout. So if we hide, if we use visibility hidden, we're going to have this space. But if we have none, we're not going to have this space. Take a look at the difference in here. Okay, so the value of visibility properties are visible and hidden. Okay, I normally prefer using display none. I think it's better to use, and the visibility property is not so used. So the CSS positioning properties allows you to position an element. It can also place an element behind another and specify what should happen when an element content is too big. So elements can be positioned using the top, bottom, left, and right properties. However, these properties will not work unless the position property is set first. They also work differently depending on the positioning method. So static is the default value for position. And a static positioned element is always positioned according to the normal flow of the page. So, in here, if we use static, it's going to appear in the left, like the normal flow of the page in the next line and starting in the left. Okay? So why is the static value used in positioning? To prohibit the styling of the element, to make the element movable, to make the element run in the natural order of the page, the flow of the page, like he already said. The fixed positioning is when we want to fix the position. So an element with a fixed position is positioned relative to the browser window and will not move even if the window is scrolled. So the position can be specified using one or more properties like top, right, bottom, and left. And for example, if we want to set something positioned to fix 30 pixels from the top and 5 pixels from the right with color red, this is going to be in here and it's not going to change if we scroll down. Okay, so we're saying 30 pixels to the top, 5 pixels to the right, and fix it in here. Basically, this is the idea. So we want to fix the paragraph to 100 pixels from the top, 50 pixels from the left, and fix it. So here the position is fixed. We want this to be 50 pixels from the left and 100 pixels from the top. Okay? And also we have the relative positioning. So a relative positioned element is positioned relative to its normal position. And again, we can use top, right, bottom, and left to specify how it's going to appear. So, for example, the paragraph here, it's fixed, but we want to have this span here relative and different from 150 pixels from the top and 50 pixels from the left. So this is the green part here, and it's relative for each part that we want to work in this case. It's kind of complicated, this part of positioning, so it's okay if you don't get for the first time. I highly suggest you to take a look at Double3's code. It's a really good documentation, okay? And I think you're going to understand when you start manipulating things using position, okay? So what is the purpose of the relative value? It puts the element relative to the normal flow, okay? Like it was mentioned in the previous page. Now floating. Here we have with CSS float, an element can be pushed to the left or right allowing other elements to wrap around it. Float is often used with images, but is also useful when working with layouts. The value for the float properties are right, left, and none. Left and right float elements in those directions respectively, and none, the default, ensures that the element will not float. Let's take a look at the example. So here we have an image, okay, and then we have some text. So we have an image inside the paragraph. So let's see what happens. If we say float right, the image will be right at the text. So like the text is going to be around of this image, and the image will be in the left and the right. If we put float left, so the image would be here and the text will be around in the right. Okay, so we can do this horizontally. In which directions can the elements be floated? So like I said, horizontally, so left and right. Elements next to each other. So if you place several floating elements one after the other, they will float next to each other if there is enough room. As an example, in a print layout, images may be set into the page such that text wraps around them as needed. So if we have here this image, so the paragraph will be right next to this image and will be, so you see it's not around like the previous one because we're setting the paragraph to be float as well. So this is the column, like in quotes, this is the column for the image and this is the column for the paragraph. What properties along with float is used in the example to make the elements float side by side? So let's take a look in here. We use float, width, and margin. So we're going to use, and here we just use width and float. So the property is width, okay? And again, this float is not a so common property that we use, so it's okay if you don't get right now. It's always good to understand the elements that we have in CSS, but for when you start doing your project, you know where to search, you know that this property exists. So clearing the float, elements that come after the floating element will flow around. To avoid this, use the clear property. The clear property specifies the size of an element where other floating elements are not allowed to be. In the example below, if we set the float property to the div, only the paragraph that comes after the div will be wrapped around the image. So let's take a look. We have here this paragraph, we have a break for the line, then we have an image and again the paragraphs. So we have the floating just for this div, as I could understand. This floating is just for the div of the image, so we just have this in here. So if there is an element with a float property, which neighbor elements will be affected? So also always the float property will affect the neighbors after the element that we have the float. So the ones coming after that element, okay? Using clear, so they use the values right, left, and both to specify the size of an element where other floating elements are not allowed to be, and the default is always none. So the clear property accepts the value left, right, none, and both, if we want to go to both directions. Clearing floats, so both is used to clear floats coming from either direction. Okay, so if we want to clear from either direction, we have this way. Clear property is used to clear the browser. No, reset the setting of the browser, take the next element of the floating group, clear the style of the web. So we're working with floating, so this is the one, okay? Let's go to the next one. We're almost finishing. The overflow property. This is a really nice one that you might use a lot. So as discussed earlier, every element on the page is a box. If the height of the box is not set, the height of that box will grow as large as necessary to accommodate the content. So if we have in here, for example, width 150 pixels, height 150 pixels, background, blah, blah, blah. So the image, the text has a height greater than the div. And why is that? Because we're setting that the div has height 150 pixels. So the style is inside this div, but the text it's greater than this height. That's why the blue it's not getting all of the div in here. Okay. So the CSS overflow property specifies the behavior that occurs when an element content overflows the element's block. That's what is happening in here. So the overflow property is used to make the box fit to the content it contains, to make the box be compatible with the web stands, specify the behavior that occurs when the content overflows the elements block. Okay, this is the last one. The overflow property values. So there are 4 values for the overflow property: that it's visible, the default value, scroll, hidden, and auto. So the value scroll results in clipped overflow, but a scroll bar is added, so the rest of the content may be seen. Like here we're using scroll, so now we can see this scroll bar in here, so we can check all of the content without changing the height of this div. Okay, so to produce horizontal and vertical scroll bars. So if we want to add scroll bars, we can use here overflow, and here is scroll. The property is overflow and the value is scroll. Now we have another property that is the auto and hidden. So the auto will be whatever we saw so far, and the hidden will the overflow is clipped and the rest of the content will be invisible. So in here, this is the overflow. We don't have the scroll bar, and we also cannot read whatever we might have in this div. Okay, so the hidden doesn't allow us to see everything that we might contain this div. So what is the default value of the overflow property? So it's the visible one. That is the first example that we saw with overflow. Now the last lesson for this module, we have the z-index property. So when elements are positioned outside the normal flow, they can overlap the other elements. The z-index property specifies the stack order of an element, which element should be placed in front of or behind the others. So if we put here, let me take a look. So for example, here we're not setting which color should be in front of the other. So it's kind of the default case here, it's going to give this way. But we can set, for example, if we want the blue to be in front of the red, we can use the z property. Right now we're not using, but we're going to see in the future. So by default, which element in the markup will overlap the others when the elements begin stacking? So the last element will overlap the others. Every time the first one will be behind and the new one will be in front. Okay, but it doesn't need to be this way. We can change using the z-index. So assigning a higher z-index value to the blue div and a lower z-index value to the red div will result in the following. So here, if we want to show the blue first, we need to assign a higher value for z-index than the red one. So now we change it, who is in the front and who is in the back. Okay. So in order to make the z property works, you must position element. Again, if you take a look, we're using z-index and positioning, so we need to use the position element as well. All right. So now let's test our knowledge in this module during this quiz. So if you give a negative value to the top property, in which direction will the box be moved? So let's draw a little bit here. This is from the previous example. Let me remove this part, maybe next time. So we always have to think on the 0 point. So here we are, okay? When we use the top property, we're always going down. So if we say 30 pixels, we're going down in the top, okay? But when we use minus, this is the regular flow when we're using top. So when we use minus, we're going up. It's like a different way of thinking. I know it's complicated, but this is the right one, okay? We're going up. When the float property is used with the values of left and right, anything else that lives in the container element will become invisible, flow around the element associated with the float property, be moved down of the element associated with the float property. So will be float around, okay? So when the text needs more space than dimensions of the box, the browser shows scroll for the overflow property with the values of scroll and auto. The way that this question was made is not so good, but that's it. Assign width of 500 pixels to the text element and enable fixed scroll bars. So overflow will be scroll and the width will be 500 pixels. Okay, and now the last question, fill in the blanks and make the blue box disappear from the page. So like we saw before, we have to use z index together with position in here. So position absolute, z index 20, and here we want to make the blue box disappear. How can we make the blue box disappear? We can display none. Okay, so let's start this new module. We're going to work with CSS 3, so this is the latest standard for CSS, and this contains all the features for all CSS, but with some new ones that we're going to see deeper in this module. There is the border radius, border image, multiple backgrounds, animation, and effects. So is it possible to have multiple backgrounds in CSS 3? Yes, like I just mentioned. So these are some new features to make web development easier and faster. CSS 3 introduces additional new features including the following. So bulk shadow and gradients. Gradients, it's more for background colors. If you want to have different colors instead of one static color, we can use this gradient. And bulk shadow is kind of the same idea as the text shadow that we already saw. So CSS defines two types of gradient. We have linear and radial. Okay, we can use these two types, and we're going to see future how to use this. And we also have the transform, so it allows us to rotate, scale, move, and squill elements. We have also transition, so if we want to do something that we can transition, I don't know, we want to open, when we click in a button, it opens an input tag for us. We can use the transition to use this, or also animation if we want to do other things. And about CSS 3, I recommend you to sign up for our workshops because we introduce a lot of properties of this CSS 3. It's very nice. It's every Saturday. I think it's one Saturday yes. It's every other Saturday, basically one Saturday yes and the other no. So I highly recommend you to take a look. If you want to know a little bit more, click on the description below. Okay? So which CSS 3 features allow animation from one CSS property value to another? We have animations. Oops, actually it's transitions, like I said. Animations is for other thing, I'm sorry. So let's see in the next lesson. So vendor prefixes. We have our CSS browser prefixes are a way for browser marketers to add support for new CSS features during periods of testing and experimentation. So browser prefixes are used to add new features that may not be part of the final and formal CSS specification. For example, the prefix for Safari and Chrome is WebKit. The border radius property is currently supported in Chrome, Safari, and Mozilla as long as it is accompanied by the border prefix. So to specify the border radius, we can use the WebKit border radius, and then we can give. So the border radius will make the border rounded, like we can see in here. Instead of a rectangle, we can have this rounded. So fill in the blanks to add the right prefix to Google Chrome. Like I said, is WebKit. Okay, this is the prefix. And let's see the next one. So here's a list of all prefixes that we can use. So we have Moz from Firefox, WebKit for Safari and Chrome, O for Opera, and MS to Internet Explorer. So drag and drop support to support border radio in Mozilla Firefox as well as in a WebKit based browser. So WebKit border radius, and we can use Moz if we want to use Moz border radius if you want to use in Mozilla. Okay, Firefox. Let's see the next lesson. So rounded corners. Now we're going to work a little bit with this border radius. So we can round the corners using pixels. Okay, so if we want to have a border with 20 pixels, we're going to have this, instead of a rectangle, we have this border. And we can also specify border radius in the top left, top right, top bottom right, and bottom left. So instead of having all of the borders the same way, we can specify for each type. So for example, here the top left and top right will be 0, and bottom right and bottom left will be 20 pixels. So here it's a rectangle, but here it's rounded. Okay, only bottom rounded. So add the border radius values to indicate 0 pixels to the top left, 15 pixels to top bottom left, 10 pixels to bottom right, and 20 pixels to top right. So like I mentioned, we always start on top, so 15 pixels, 20 pixels, then we go to, let me take a look, 10 pixels and 15. Let's see if this is the correct one. No, so here it's not 15, it's what? Oh, it's 0. I put 15, but it's 0 for the top left. I'm so sorry, but I said it right. So creating a circle. A rectangle can be turned into a circle using only CSS. To create a circle, the border radius should be half of the height and the width. The rectangle in the example below has a width and height to 200 pixels, so if we want to make this a circle, we're going to use border radius 100 pixels. And that's what we can see in here. Okay, so continue creating a circle. To make a circle, the border radius should be an even number, 100 pixels, or equals to half of the height and the width. Okay, so let's continue. The next property, so I open up without wanting in the VS Code, I'm sorry. We have the box shadow. So the box shadow is the same idea as the text shadow. Okay, so the box shadow property applies shadow to elements. Components of the box shadow properties are decoded by browsers in the following manner. The first length for the horizontal. Okay, so this is for the horizontal, this is for the vertical, and this is for the color of the shadow. It's the same idea that we saw in text shadow. So we have 10 pixels, oh sorry, I think it's 10 pixels horizontally, 10 pixels vertically, and the color is gray, but here we use hexadecimal values. So add the box shadow property for a result of 10 pixels vertical, 20 pixels horizontal, and red color. So here we want to use the box shadow property, and first is the horizontal, so horizontal is 20, and then vertical and red. So good. Besides color, there are also two optional values for the box shadow element, which are blur and spread. So for the blur, we should use before the color value. Okay, so here we don't have this blur. Let me see. Oh, we have this blur, okay, and the spread in here. So they are put before the color value. So we have the blur of 5 pixels and the spread of 5 pixels as well. So which two choices indicate optional values for the box shadow is the spread distance and the blur distance. And the negative values can also be used for the box shadow property. So remember here again our y and axis and y and x axis. Oh, this is the y and this is the x. If we use negative, we're going to the other direction, so we're going to left and down. Okay, and the blur, it's not allowed, the negative values, and the negative values in spread radius will shrink the shadow. So let's see in here. You can see now we have the shadow in here, not in here if we have a positive thing. So place the box shadow properties values in the correct order. So it's always first the horizontal, then the vertical, then the blur, then the spread, and at the end the color. Okay? Now let's go to the next lesson that we have in here. So we can create an inner shadow in the box shadow property using the inset keywords that allows to draw an inner shadow in the box. To show an inset shadow, just add the inset word, so keyword. So we put the inset before every other property that we might use in here. Okay, so we have an inner shadow in here, like we can see. So which keyword is used to create shadow within the element is the inset. Okay, we can layering multiple shadows using comma separated. So for example, we want to have one shadow in here, we use comma, and we can create another type of box shadow just using the comma. So here we have one box shadow for this part and the other for this other part. Okay, and we can also use different properties like we are using here. We can use multiple properties for this. We can use multiple shadows in here, so they are separated by commas. Okay, always remember to use comma when you wanna add multiple shadows. Transparency effect. So we're we're a little bit far from the end, but it's okay. So transparency effect. Before CSS 3, transparent background image were used to create transparency effect. The new features of CSS 3 now make it easier to create transparency effects. So CSS supports color names, hexadecimals, and RGB colors. In addition, CSS introduces the following: RGBA colors. So it's an extension of RGB. We have this HSL, that it's hue, saturation, lightness colors, and we can use this to create like a new way of using colors, not only RGB, hexadecimal values and color names. We can use these ones, and we can have this different style here. So let's take a look at the question. So fill in the blanks to create a footer with an inset shadow and a 1 pixel border at the top. So here what we want to do, so something top, so we want to add a border at the top. So border top, 1 pixel, okay. Background with RGBA, and we want to have a box shadow in the footer, so box shadow. And here we can put an inset because we want to have inset box shadow, and with the specification that they want. Okay, here are some new features like I mentioned before. If you want to understand a little bit more, you can take a look at W3 schools. So text shadow property. Here we already saw the text shadow, but we can use more things. Like we can use more properties using comma separated shadow, the same thing as we were using for the box shadow. Okay, so add a 15 pixel left and 15 pixel down blue text shadow. So since we want to go to the left, let's remember our draw in here. We're going to use a minus, and in here since we're going down, we have to think about the top. So do you remember the top was opposite to what we expect? So down it's a positive value in here. I know it's confusing, it's okay to be confusing. It's the same idea as the top. So here it's 25 and here's 15. Okay, now let's go to the next one. So multiple text shadows. Here we can use the same idea as the multiple box shadows using a comma in there. So like here we have one shadow in gray and another in blue, and we can have multiple shadows. So how many text shadows? We can have multiple. Okay, the same way as the box shadows. So pseudo classes, let's take a look at this new feature. Working with pseudo classes. So the CSS pseudo classes allows us to style elements or parts of elements that exist in the document 3 without using JavaScript or any other script. A pseudo class starts with a colon. So it's the same idea as when we were working with link, the A tag that we have column hover, a column visited. So we can have this first child, last child as well. So the first child pseudo class matches an element that is the first child element of some other element. In the following example, the selector matches any P element that is in the first child of the div. So the parent, the first child, is this here. So only the paragraph, the first child, that is the first paragraph, will have this style that we're setting using the colon first child. Okay, and the last child is going to get the last paragraph, so the last paragraph will change its style. And we can work with this. So we start with the first child of the P element, so we want to use the P, and we want to work with the first child. Okay, it's like the inheritance we can kind of make a relationship with this. So pseudo elements, let's take a look at this part. Here it's again the same way that we were using pseudo I forget the other name, but the pseudo classes, we can use pseudo elements. They're used to select specific parts of an element. There are 5 pseudo elements in CSS, each starting with double column. So first line, first letter, selection, that selects the portion of an element that is selected by a user, the double column before and after. So the first line here, we can get to the first line. The selection here, we're going to select some part that we want, and so on and so forth. So the mouse prefix is used, the selection element is not supported by Mozilla yet. This is just a note. So working with pseudo elements, which of the following is not a pseudo element in CSS? So this heading doesn't exist if you take a look at the previous page. Working with pseudo elements, so using before and after pseudo elements allows us to add a wide variety of content to the page. So in the example below, the before pseudo element is used to add an image before the list. So before the list, we're going to have an image, as we can see in here. It's the same idea, for example, if we were trying to use the unordered list like we did before. So this is the idea in that example. So add an element prior to the paragraph using the pseudo element. So if we want to use prior, we're going to use before. And again, since we're going to work with image, we have to get the URL path for this image. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now we're going to use this word wrap. The word wrap properties allows long words to be broken and wrapped into the next line. It takes 2 elements, normal and break word. So normal is like the default case here. So here we say that they are all wrapped around. And if we use break word, it's going to break the word if we are getting out of the content. This is basically the idea. So fill in the blanks to fit the text into the paragraph. So we're going to word wrap. And since we want to fit the text, we're going to use the break word. In this case, not the other that would continue that part. And now the last lesson of this module is the font face. So this font face rules allows custom fonts to be loaded into a web page. With the help of this rule, designs are no longer limited to the fonts that are installed on a user computer. So we can use this font type that is TTF, OTF, and EOT for Internet Explorer. So let's see here. So the font face rule, which 2 of the following fonts are supported in Firefox, Safari, and Chrome. So it's TTF and OTF. The EOTF, like we saw in the previous table, it's for Internet Explorer, okay? Using the font face rule. So each form of the font family must be declared using the font face rule. In the example below, a custom font called Delicious is loaded and used for heading. So if we want to download a font family called Delicious, we have to use this font family rule. We say the name of the font family that is Delicious and the source for this font family. So we give the URL and the path for this font family, the same thing as we do for image. And we can do this in different ways to get a different font family. Okay, so define a new font family test, name it a test. So here we have to say font face. I said font family, right? Here we're going to say font family, and the name of this font family will be test. And the source is this URL with this path test.otf. Okay, and now let's do the quiz for this module. Let's see if we get the whole idea of this. So in the following code snippet, what value is given for the bottom right corner radius? So remember, we always start to bottom left, bottom right, top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right, I guess. So I believe it's 40. I always get confused in the bottom. So it's top left, top right, bottom left. So it's 30 pixels for this case. Yes, we always have to think in the same, like the clock. When defining a new font in CSS3, use font face, like we saw in the previous lesson. Drag and drop the options below to color the testing paragraph with ID my test. So the ID is my test, so hash my test. Also add a black shadow to the text, and that is 5 pixels to the right and 3 pixels down. So here we want a text shadow, and it's 5 pixels to the right. So remember, the first property is the horizontal, so 5 pixels. The second, it's for the vertical, 3 pixels. And we want to say here this color that is black, okay, in hexadecimal. And we want the color to be red, so we're going to say color red, okay? And now this last question is fill in the blanks so that the first line of the paragraph uses the newly defined font called test. So remember, font face, the font family is test, the source is in the URL path, and we want to use the first line, so we can use here the pseudo elements that it's using the first line. And what we want to do in here, we want to use the newly defined font called. So here we're going to use font family, and the name of the font family is test. Okay, so we're done with this module. We're almost finishing the course. So now let's work with gradients and backgrounds. So CSS3 gradients enable you to display smooth transitions between two or more specified colors, and you can use them as linear or radial gradients. To create a linear gradient, you must define at least 2 color stops. Color stops are the color among which you want to render smooth transitions. You can also set a starting point and a direction or an angle if you are in a radial, along with the gradient effect. In the example below, the colors blue and black are used to create a linear gradient from top to bottom. So here we set most linear gradient, we say the beginning and the stop, and if you take a look, it's beginning in blue and stopping in black, and here we have a gradient. Okay, so what types of colors values cannot be used within the linear gradient? So he specify here in the notes, and it's this, we can use color names, hexadecimal, RGB, or HSL to define the gradient color. So we cannot use the CMYK. Color stops can be added one after the other, separated with a comma. So the browser will then determine each color stop position. In the example below, the linear gradient has multiple color stops and run from top to bottom. So here we have blue, then we have yellow, then green, then pink, green, then pink, and white. So we're changing, we can have multiple colors in our gradient, okay? Add the missing color stop value to create sharp lines between the colors. So we can have red 20, green 20%, green 80%, and blue 80% because we want sharp lines. So we're going to use 20 for the same red in here, okay? Direction of the gradient, so this can be changed. We were using from top to bottom, but it can start to left, moving to right, or bottom to top. Okay, so we can have left to right, bottom to top, and the other ways that we can do in here. So direction of the gradient, which of the following directions is not supported? So it's not supported the center, we can only use the other directions. Angle of the gradient, so as an alternative to predefined directions, you can control the gradient direction by specifying an angle. The angle is specified as an angle extending between a horizontal line and the gradient. In other words, 0 degrees creates a left to right gradient, while 90 degrees bottom to top gradient. So always, let's do another drawing here. So this is a circle, and if we put 0%, we're going to use in this direction. If we have 90%, we're going to 90 degrees, it's going to this direction because we have a angle here. Okay, so we can set using the degrees as we want. So linear, we want a linear gradient left, red, yellow. So which of the following choices is equivalent to the example above? So again, remember the circle, if we set left, we're starting at left and we're going to the right. So the angle is 0, and then red, yellow. So if we click in here, it's gradient 0 degrees, red, yellow. And repeating a linear gradient, we can use the repeating linear gradient property. So it's going to repeat this linear gradient. Instead of just going from blue to green, we're going to go to blue to green multiple times. So we can use this linear repeating gradient. We can use this repeating linear gradient as the property to repeat the linear gradient. Okay. Now let's work with radial gradients in here. And it's the same idea as the linear, but here instead of going linear, we're going to radial. So again, we must define at least 2 color stops, and the radial gradient is defined by its center. So here we start at the center, and then we are going out of this center. So the position, shape or size, color and stop. The first values define the gradient position. We can use a descriptive keyword such as top, bottom, center or left. We can specify, for example, 50-50% to set the gradient at the center, or 0-0% to start the top left. And the second value defines the shape and the gradient size. There are 2 arguments to shape the gradients. The first is the ellipse, which is the default, and the second is a circle. And that's basically it. So radial, we always have to think in circle when we're working with this. So select the correct parameters for radial gradient. So we use the position and the color, stops and size, basically. Okay. Setting the shape. So the shape parameter defines the shape. If you do not define the shape of the radial gradient, it will take the ellipse value by default. In the example below, we didn't specify the shape of the first div's radial gradient, but for the second we set the value to circle. So this is an ellipse and this is a circle. It's slightly different because an ellipse, it's more rounded. It's not more rounded, it's more in a different way. So what is the default case for shape? It's an ellipse. Okay. Now let's see the radial gradient position. So essentially we can use the same method used to specify the location of a background image with the background position CSS property to specify the location of the ellipse center. We specify the horizontal position of the background and optionally the vertical position using either keywords left, center, right, or top, center, bottom, length values, percent values, or some combinations of these. We already saw, right? We can use the words or we can use percent. So here, if we want to start on top left, here we can use in percentages. So which choices is not acceptable? We cannot use, let me just take a look in here again. So we have top left, percent, and here it says that we can use pixels and EMS, so we cannot use radian. This is not a unit that we can use. Setting the color stops. So as with linear gradients, a color stop is specified with a color plus an optional stop position with a length of percentage value. So we can set, like we were doing linear, if we wanted to shape it linear. Here we can say, oh, 40% green, 50% yellow, and 70% blue, and we get this thing in here. Okay. So add a circular radial gradient to produce black and red colors with color stops according at 20 pixels and 70 pixels. So the black will stop at 20 and the red will stop at 70, like it said in the question. Okay, now let's see the next one, the next lesson. We're going to work with background size. So background size, we can do some things. Let's take a look. So the background size property adds new functionality to CSS that allows us to specify the size of background images using either length of percentages. So we can say what will be the size of the background. Like we can manipulate the background the same way that we can manipulate the image. Okay. So let's take a look in here. So resize the background image to a height of 100 pixels and width 200. So we always start horizontally and then vertically. So 200 pixels and then 100 pixels. Okay. And the background size values, there are two possible values for background size, that is contain and cover. The contain keyword scales the image so that it fits the container. In other words, the image will grow or shrink proportionally, but the width and height will not exceed the container's dimension, like this way. And the other is cover. So the cover is scaled to fit the entire container. However, if that has a different aspect ratio, the image will be cropped. So this is for other purposes, if we want to fit the element that we're working with. So which of the images, which property scales the image so that both width and height fit inside the content area? So it's the contain, okay? The cover if we want to cover the content. Then we have the background clip in here. Let's take a look. So the background clip property specifies the painting area of the background. The property takes 3 different values: border box, padding box, and content box. The border box is the default. The background is painted to the outside edge of the border. The padding box, the background is painted to the outside edge of the padding, and the content box, the background is painted within the content box. So let's take a look. If we use padding box, this is the first case where we're going to paint everything that we have in the content and also the padding. If we use content box, we're just going to paint what is the content. The padding is not going to be painted in here, okay? So which value is not used as the background here? The text box. It doesn't exist. It's just border box, content box, and padding box. And we can do this with images as well. So we can use content box if we wanna use images. So the background image extends only to the edge of the content box, basically, okay? So does background clip work with images? Yes, like we checked previously. Transparent borders. We're almost finishing this lesson. So let's take a look at this. Transparent borders with background clips. So setting a transparent border on an element will reveal the element's own background under the border. In the example below, we set the border to be transparent using RGBA. Okay, we already saw this RGBA, but they actually appeared solid gray. So like we can see here, it appears solid gray in here. By setting the background clip cover to padding box, the border will be made transparent. So here it's transparent. Okay, it's going to be like in an overflow of this. So this is kind of like, it's not so used, so it's okay again if you don't understand so well, okay? So drag and drop below to create transparent borders for an element. So here background clip, and we want to create for transparent borders, so we're going to use padding box. Okay, now let's see the multiple background images, what we can do with this. So the ability to have multiple background images is a new feature in CSS 3. Multiple background images are specified using a comma separated list of values. Like the same idea, every time we want to do multiple things in the same property, we always have to use comma. Okay, so here we're using 2 images in the background. So here we can see 1 image for the background and another. Okay, so we can use 2 images for background. So the last image in the background image will appear at the top, at the bottom. Let's take a look why. So this is the CSS logo in the top, and then so in the image we have 2 backgrounds image. The first is CSS logo aligned to the bottom and right. The second is coding image because we set this way. The first image will appear on the top and the last on the bottom. Okay, so the first one on the top and the second on the bottom. So the last image will appear on the bottom. Okay. Multiple backgrounds. The position of the background image can be changed using the background position property. So here we can use again the right top, the left top, bottom left, right bottom, those things. We can say where we want to put the image. Okay. And we can say if we want a repetition or not. So fill in the blanks to add 2 background images to the element. with the first positioned at the top left corner and the other at the top right corner. So here again, if we want to use background image, we have to set the URL, and again here a comma to separate the two images that we're going to work with. Here, the first image, we want this to be on the top left, so left top, and the second image on the top right, so right top. Okay? And now let's do the last lesson of this module and then the quiz. So here it's opacity. Opacity property provides an excellent means of adding opacity to any element. In the example below, we set different levels of opacity in the same picture so you can see clearly the difference. So this is opacity 1, half, and 0.25. So it kind of fade away in here. So to set an element opacity 30%, we use 0.3. Okay, so we can have opacity from 0 up to 1. Opacity Internet Explorer. So to have the opacity property work in all versions of Internet Explorer, use the filter (alpha opacity equals to x, where x can be a number from 0 up to 100. So in this case, we can work with percentage. So this opacity will work in any browser, but this filter only works for Internet Explorer. So opacity works for anyone, but not the Internet Explorer. Okay, so if we want to use in here, we have to say filter alpha and blah blah blah. Now let's do the quiz to finish this module, and then we have just 2 modules to finish this whole course, so stay with me until the end. So add a circular radial gradient to produce red and blue with color stops accordingly at 15 pixels and 25 pixels. So we want a radial gradient, and here we want red in 15, blue in 25, and here we're going to put 50 again, okay, because this is one property that we're saying, because we want a circular. So circular, they have the same values in here. In the background clip property, which values allows for the creation of transparent borders? So transparent border, we can use padding box. Okay. Drag and drop from the options below to make the background image of the element 100 times 100 pixels in size. Also set the opacity of the element to 50%. So here we're going to use URL to the path of this image on the background. Here we want to set the background size, right? And then we want the opacity of 50%. So opacity, and remember, when we use opacity, we have to use a number from 1 to 0. We just use 100 to 0 when we're working with filter alpha. So drag and drop options for Internet Explorer that we're going to do here right now. So drag and drop options to apply 50% opacity to the div and make it also work in Internet Explorer. So opacity here is 0.5, and in here we're going to use filter, alpha, and 50%. Okay, so we finished this module, and now we have 2 more to go. So let's finish this course. So now let's do transition and transform. CSS transitions allows us to change from one property value to another over given duration. So here, instead of explaining here, I'm going to show you one thing that I did. So this is one page, okay, and I'm using here one transform, okay, this transition here. So if I remove, let me comment this out first so you can see what is happening. If I comment this out and I refresh this in here, what will happen? So if I click, it just changed without a smooth transition, okay? But if I use this transition in here, you're going to see the difference. And I click, I have this like, it's not a fast transition, it's a smooth transition. So we can use this transition to set how much time we're going to spend to change one thing to another. This is just one example, okay? The one that I said before. So which of the following is not supported parameter of the transition property? So let's come back here to this page. So we have the transition property to transform with a duration and with an easing timing function. So the only thing that we don't use is the type. Okay, so this is the correct answer. The transition property. So in the example below, the div element has width and height 50% with a green background. We specify a transition effect for the width property with a duration of 3 seconds. So here we're saying that we're going to expand in the width in 3 seconds. So this is what is happening, okay? Add a transition property that changes the background color in 5 seconds. So transition background color 5 seconds, and this is in function. Timing function. So the transition timing function property specify the speed curve of the transition effect. So is the animation starts slowly, then accelerate quickly, is in starts slowly, then accelerates and stop abruptly, is out. So here we have some kinds of example that we can use, okay? You can take a look at this later. So which of the following timing functions define custom transitions? So let's take a look here, custom transitions. So finally we have cubic bezier, which allows you to define your own value. So this is our custom transition, this cubic here. Let's see the next problem. So we have this other lesson here, this transform rotate. So here we can rotate the image, for example, things we can do. We can translate, rotate, scale, and skew elements. A transformation is an effect that lets an element change shape, size, and position, and supports 2D and 3D transformation. And let's take a look here. So we're saying this is our element before the transformation, and if we do a rotate 10 degrees, this will rotate 10 degrees, and here we can see the rectangle, it's not this way anymore. Okay, so we can change so what value does the rotate function takes? So it changed the angle of the element that we're working with. If we're using negative values, so we're going to rotate the element counterclockwise, and positive values will rotate an element clockwise, okay? This is the idea. So if we use 10 degrees, we'll in clockwise, minus 10 counterclockwise. So add the transformation property to rotate the element 45 degrees counterwise. So here we're going to rotate, and since it's counter, we use a minus in here. Okay, let's go to the next lesson. So transform origin, translate, and skew. So here the transform origin properties allows you to change the position of transformed elements. So the default value for the property is 50-50%, which corresponds to the center of the element. In the example below, we use the transform origin property together with the transform rotate. So the origin of the x-axis horizontal is set to 25% from the left. The origin of the y-axis vertical is set 70% from above. So this is how it looks like. So we're doing this rotating, and we're changing the position as well. It's not in the middle of this. So here we're doing this rotation 15 degrees, and we're changing where it's supposed to be, and it's not in the center anymore, okay? Which choice is the default value for the transformation origin property? It's always the center. The translate method moves an element from its current position according to the parameter given from the x-axis and the y-axis. Positive values will push an element down and to the right of its default position, while negative values will pull an element up and to the left of its default position. So here if we put 100 pixels to the right and 50 pixels to down, it's going to translate this. Remember, always the first input is the horizontal and the second is the vertical. So here we're changing this 100 pixels and 50 pixels from the top. Okay, so add a translate function that moves the element 50 pixels from the left and 100 pixels from the top. So here we're going to use translate, and here we want 50 and here 100. Okay, Now let's go to this method here. That method squares an element along the x-axis and y-axis by the given angles. So here if we put 30 degrees, this will make now not a rectangle anymore, but this other form here. Okay, so create like an angle here in the sides of the rectangle. So which values type is used in the square function? So it's degrees. Okay, it's always an angle that we're going to work with this. Now let's go to the next one. So scale and multiple transformations. So for scale, method increases or decreases the size of an element according to the parameter given for the width and height. So remember, it's going to increase or decrease proportionally by the number that we put. This is the scale. So if we want to decrease 0.7 horizontally, 0.7 vertically, it's going to decrease this way. Or if we want to increase, it's this way. It's like a scale that we see normally. So here we just use the word scale and we'll do this scale for us. And the number is always from 0 up to 1, okay? So multiple transforms can be used at once, and we just put one name and right next to the other. So if we want to rotate and translate, we put one right next to the other without the comma, okay? So when adding multiple in a single blah blah blah, we separate them with spaces, not comma, like we saw before. Now let's go to the next one. We have keyframes and animation. So let's see, for animations, an animation lets element gradually change from one style to another. You can change as many CSS properties as you want to, as many times as you want to. So keyframes hold the styles the element will have at certain times. So here, when we specify CSS style inside the keyframe rule, the animation will gradually change from the current style to the new style at certain times. To get an animation to work, you must bind the animation to an element. The following example will change the background color for an element three times. When the animation is 50% complete, 70%, and 100. So when it's 0% has color red, 50 it's yellow, 70% is blue, and when it's complete it's green. So this is basically the idea of animation. So can you have multiple keyframes in an animation property? Yes, like we saw in the previous example. As an alternative to using percentages, you can use from and to keywords. So from is a starting offset, so from is the 0% and to is the 100%. So to is the goal. Okay, so which alternative word can be used to replace 100? It's the from. And now the last part is the keyframe rule. So to get an animation to work, you must bind the animation to an element. In the example below, the animation lasts 1 second and change the background color of the red div to green and blue. So like we said here, for 0% it's red, 50% is green, and 100% is blue. Okay, and the animation duration we put here 1 second. That's why here we have this time set. Okay, so fill in the blanks to define an animation name anim containing keyframes. So here, if we want to use a keyframe, we have to use this thing here and the name of the keyframe that we're going to work. So here, this keyframes, and now we can use this keyframes animation. It's very nice to use these things. It's new features that you can implement in your code. So feel free to do some examples of it. Okay. So the animation name property defines which animation to use. In this example, the name of the animation is set to color change, which matches the defined keyframes. So here we define what this keyframe does, and then we can use this keyframe using the animation name property. Okay, otherwise we're not able to use. It's like when we're in Python and we define a function and then we have to call the function. This is how we can use the animation name. Fill in the blanks to make the animation complete in 5 seconds. So WebKit animation duration. Okay, this is the property, and we can use 5s for 5 seconds of duration. We have some other properties. So we have the animation timing function to specify the speed curve of animation. So here's the same idea as the transform. We have the is linear, is in, is out, is in out, the cubic here that it's a custom animation timing function, and this is the same idea as the transform. So here, if we want to specify a 2-second delay before the animation begin, here we have to put animation delay 2 seconds. More animation properties. So the animation iteration count property determines the number of times an animation repeats. So if we want to repeat 5 times, we use this iteration count. And if we want to have a forever loop, we use infinite in here. And we have other, we have the animation direction and other properties that we can use. So which property value is used to have the animation repeat forever? So it's the infinite. Okay, this is forever loop. Animation property. So like we know so far, we can have the name property, duration, timing, function, delay, iteration count, and direction. And we also have this, so a single animation property can be used to achieve blah blah blah. So here's the same idea as when we were working with list, the style for the list. So we can have in different lines, or we can say the same thing that we have in here in one line. So for example, we are saying the color, the name of the animation, then the duration, the timing, function, delay, the iteration count, and the direction. So we can put everything in the same line. It's another idea. So this is the animation name, this is the duration, this is the delay, and the end, what we want a forever loop. So here we're going to put infinite. Okay, so that's it for these animation properties. Let's see the next lesson. So this is the last lesson of the module, is the 3D transforms. So along with the X and Y axis, 3D transforms introduce the Z axis. So if you're not familiar, it's okay. This is something that we see more when we are graduating in parts that work with math. So we have this Z axis, we have the X axis, and the Y. I'm not so sure what is the correct. I think here's the X and here's the Y. But we can have a 3D if we use these 3 axes in here. Okay, so we can rotate in X, rotate in Y, and rotate in Z, and whatever we want. We just have to set what will be our rotation and the angle. So if we want to rotate in Z, if we want to rotate in Y, in X, so this is basically the idea, a transformation in 3 dimensions. So add a rotate function that rotates the element 45 degrees around the Z axis. So here we're going to use the rotate Z. Okay. The translations, we can also do translations in 3D, horizontally using translate X, vertically using translate Y, and into or out of this screen using translate Z. And we can use the same units that we already know, like pixels, EM, percentage, and other units. So this is basically the idea. We just need to set what is our direction when we do the translation. Okay, so this is the translation in X, and we have other translations if we want. And also we have the translation 3D, that is a method that allows us to pass X, Y, and Z all at once in the following order. So we put X, Y, and Z, and it's going to do this change. And the same thing that we can have in translate and rotate, we can have a scale 3D as well. Okay, always thinking about the direction that we want to work with. So filling the missing value to push the elements 100 pixels back. So if we want to push, we're going to use minus 100 pixels in here. And we have perspective. So the perspective defines how the depth of the 3D scene is rendered. Think of perspective as a distance from the viewer to the object. The greater the value, the further the distance, so the less intense the visual effect. When defining the perspective property for an element, it is the child element that gets the perspective view, not the element himself. So if we want to get a perspective of the element, we have to work with the child, not with the element. So if we have a div, we have to work with this thing that is inside this other div in here. That's why we're changing the green div and not the empty div, basically, so we can see this way. So higher perspective values means further distance. Okay? And now let's do this quiz, the quiz for this module, and then we just have one more module to finish. So which of these is a valid CSS3 transformation statement? So we know that it's a scale. Okay. How will an element with a statement transform translate 0, 100 pixels behave? So remember, horizontal and vertical. So in the horizontal, we're not going to change anything, and on the vertical, we're going to change. We're going to change 100 pixels, so we need to think. We're going to change 100 pixels down in this way, okay? This is because we're changing in the y-axis. Which transformation does not exist in CSS3? So we don't have a squill B in this case, okay? We just have a squill. Fill in the blanks to rotate the object with an ID ball 45 degrees counterclockwise. So the ID for this, it's ball. So remember, ID is a hash and the name of the ID that it's ball. And we wanna rotate the object 45 degrees counterclockwise. So to use the rotate, we have to use the transform, rotate. And since we wanna go counterclockwise, it's minus 45. We already have minus here. Okay? And the last one, fill in the blanks to make the first letter of the paragraph red and bold. Also flip the paragraph upside down. So the paragraph, we wanna do what? We wanna flip upside down. So here, since we're using rotate, we have to write transform. And here we wanna make the first letter of the paragraph. So here we can write first letter. Remember pseudo elements, okay? The color is red, and bold, it's for font weight, as we use it in the beginning of this course. So we're done with this quiz. Let's now do our last module. So now let's do the last module. So CSS filters. The CSS filter property lets you apply graphical effects like blurring or color shifting to an element. Filters are commonly used to adjust the rendering of image backgrounds and borders. Image filtering is useful when you want to have different styling for the same image. Instead of uploading multiple images to the website, you can upload only one image and then define visual effects using the filter property. So the filter functions that we can use, it's blur, brightness, contrast, drop shadow, grayscale, hue, rotate, invert, opacity, saturate, and sepia. So it's like photograph, like in Instagram we can choose different filters. CSS has the same. So which of the following is not a filter function? Is the inverse is not a filter function. So the drop shadow function, we can, in the drop shadow function, we have to pass the width, the height, the blur, and the color. We have to specify these 4 properties to use this drop shadow. So the drop shadow, we can try to think the same way as when we were working with text shadow or box shadow, the same way, okay? So fill in the blanks to create the red shadow. So here we can use drop shadow, and we already have the properties that we want, okay? Let's not the properties but the values. So filter functions, let's see what else do we got in here. So we have the grayscale function that converts an image to grayscale, and the only parameters define the proportion of the scale. So 0% grayscale is the original image, and 100% is to make completely grayscale. Okay, we work with percent. So filtered here, to use the grayscale, we have to say filter and then the name of the function. So filter grayscale, and here we're setting 50%. We also have sepia. So sepia, this is similar to using grayscale but with reddish brown color tone. And the same idea, 0% is the original filter, the original image, and 100% converts the image completely to sepia. Okay, it's like always try to think like image on Instagram, for example. So you also can saturate the function. So again, the saturate function controls the color saturation of the image, and 0% it's the original image, and 100% is 0% is completely unsaturated, and 100% is the original image. So here it's the opposite of the other function. So how many parameters does saturate function have? And only one, that is the percent, how much we want to saturate the function. The hue rotate function applies a hue rotation based on the color cycle. So this is our color cycle, and the function takes an angle of rotating as its parameter. The value of the angle defines the number of degrees around the color circle. The input samples will be adjusted. So if we put here, for example, 60, the filter will be yellow, 0 will be red, 180 will be this light blue. So this is basically the idea. Okay, we have to set the angle for this. So rotating the hue by 120 degrees will make the red color in an image. So 120, it is gray in this hue, in this color cycle. So it's green. It's going to become green. Okay? And we have the invert function that inverts the color of an image to make dark areas bright and bright areas dark. So 0% invert, leave the image unchanged, and 100% changes completely. Okay, and again, filter, the name of the function, and the percentage that we want to change. So filter, if we want to change completely invert, so we're going to use 100% to completely invert the image brightness and darkness. Let's go to the next one. We're almost finishing, so hang on in this video. The opacity function, it's again the same idea. So we have to use filter, opacity, and the percentage, but in this case 0% it's completely transparent, and 100% is the original image. So here we want to use opacity, and we want to make a semi-transparent, so here it's 50%. Okay, we have the brightness function, and adjust the brightness of an image, making it appear brighter or darker. So 0 results in an image completely black, 100% it's unchanged, and over 100 it's a brighter image. And again, the same structure, we just use one parameter that will be how bright we want to make. So the function is brightness, 150%, so it's going to be very bright. And here we want to have image circled, so here it's border radius 50%, right, because we want to round the border. The contrast function adjusts the contrast of the image, so under 100% decreases the contrast, 0% completely gray, 0.5 corresponds to 50%, while 1 is the same as 100. So if we contrast 140, it's going to change things in here. So here we're going to use the contrast, and remember we have to close with a curly brackets. Oops, it's I miswrote contrast. Okay, the blur function, here we can blur the image using just the blur, and how much we want to blur this, so we can use radius or pixels to use this blur. So filter blur, and we want to blur 5 pixels. Oops, so why is this in here? So to apply the blur effect, so it's filter blur something. So filter blur, I think I miswrote. Yes, I just miswrote that first time. Now let's go to the next one. This is the last lesson for this course. So using multiple CSS filters, we can use together by separating them with spaces without a comma. Okay, the comma is for other cases, but here we can use separating just by a space, and we can have multiple cases. So fill in the blanks to make an image circle and blur it with a gray shadow. So we want this to be circle, so so we want to blur it and with a gray shadow. So we already know that shadow needs 4 arguments, so horizontal, vertical, blur, and the color. So this is the drop shadow. Here it's the blur because we want a blur, and we want a circled image, so rounded 50%. Okay, so now let's finish our course and get our certificate. So let's do the last quiz for this module. So which of the following is a filter function? Is the invert. Okay, this is for transform, and it will be a filter function if we had here a drop shadow, not only shadow. Fill in the blanks to rotate the hue by 80 degrees. So hue rotate 80 degrees. Okay, fill in the blanks to change the saturation of an image by 50% and partially invert it. So if we want to have this saturation, we're going to use this saturation saturate, sorry, and here we want to invert 70%. Okay, fill in the blanks to create an image which is completely grayscale and has a gray shadow effect. So it's completely grayscale, we want 100% grayscale, and here we want a gray shadow effect, so it's drop shadow. Okay, we're almost finishing. So fill in the blanks to adjust the brightness of an image to 110% and apply a blur effect to it. So blur effect is always pixels or another unit, not percent. So here it's blur. And the brightness we want 110. So continue. And now fill in the blanks to make the image circle and blurred with 30% sepia applied. So if you want this circled, we're going to use the border radius. The filter, we want a sepia. And we also want it blurred, so here blurred only accept pixel and another length unit, so here it's blur. And that's it. Congratulations if you keep with me until the end. We get our certificate. I hope you enjoyed this video, and watch another SoloLearn videos that we made explaining other language. It's very good. And try to also keep up our workshops. They work a lot with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I highly recommend you to take a look on this. And thank you for watching until here. I hope you enjoyed this content, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.